So we now come to chapter 3, verses 9 to 20, which are really the climax of the first major argument of the book, where Paul shows that all human beings not only are sinners, but also are guilty sinners and therefore deserve the judgment of God, the wrath of God. And we had two questions before us for this paragraph. The first was what's here all in orange, all of these quotations from the Old Testament. What purpose do they serve? What's their function? And then secondly, this last part here about how the law speaks to those who are under the law, and so that every mouth may be stopped and the whole world may be held accountable before God. Is that fair? So let's just start with the quotations. What's the point of the quotations? Well, clearly that kind of a group sort of delineating Old Testament quotation upon Old Testament quotation is validating this part here where Paul raises the question, are the Jews in the end better off than Gentiles? Even though God is still faithful to his promises, he has already shown that they're still under the judgment of God. And so are the Jews better off in the end? And the answer is, well, no, not. It says here in the ESV, not at all, but really it's better to think of it as not altogether. This translation here, I think, is what it actually says, it seems to me. So the Jews are better off at some levels, but they're not altogether better off because, Paul says, we've already charged both Jews and Greeks are under sin. And the fact that he says we've already charged this is a way of confirming that we've read the first few chapters correctly, because he's summing up right here exactly what the first few chapters are arguing, that both Jews and Gentiles are under sin. And note that expression, under sin. He's not just arguing that we're sinful, but that we're under sin, meaning that sin has a hold on us. And in this context means that we are guilty. We are sort of locked in. We're boxed in, and we're under judgment. And then he goes on to show that. Missed this first line here from Psalm 14. So all of these quotations then are showing that both Jews and Gentiles are under sin. Most of the quotations, if you go back and read the context, are descriptions of Jewish sinners or sin among the Jews. There's one or two that probably have more of a universal reference frame, but for the most part, they're referring to Israelites. And then the other thing that stands out about him is this, the way he sort of talks about how their throat is an open grave, their tongues, their lips, their mouth, their feet. So meaning that we're sort of thoroughly soiled by sin, tainted by sin, and under its grip because of the guilt that it brings us all under. And there's a lot more that could be said other than that. The final ones are a kind of summary of what's the cause of all this sin, this guilt, and it's the fact that they haven't known the way of peace and there's no fear of God guiding them, which of course I say them, it's us, it's everybody. So that's the quotations. I think that's a pretty straightforward connection there of that all Jews and Greeks. Greeks here also means Gentiles, just the word for Gentiles, that we're all under sin and guilty. And then he sort of sums up the first few chapters in about as concise a way as he could. Here, now we know whatsoever the law says, it speaks to those who are under law, so that every mouth may be stopped, the whole world may be held accountable to God. Now, how can that be fair? If the law speaks to those who were under the law, which would be the Israelites, and there were many, many more people in the world who had never heard of the law or didn't know hardly anything about the law never spoke to them. So how could the whole world, the people who are outside of Israel, be held accountable to God by virtue of what happened within Israel and what was said to them by the law? And I think it's probably like if you were testing your pool water, if you had a pool, if you were fortunate enough to have a pool, and you have to test what they call the pH balance in the water to determine whether you need to add chemicals to even that out, make it safer to swim in. So in order to test the pool water, what you don't do is you don't siphon off all of the pool water into some colossal sized bucket and then drop in a couple drops to test the pH level in that water, and then dump all of that water from the pool back into the pool. It would take you, 2 days to do that and be a waste of your energy, nor do you need to do that. What you do is you just take a tiny little vial and drop it into or dip it into the pool, and then put your little drops into that little vial, because you only need to test a tiny bit of the water in order to make a judgment about the whole pool, because the water is all made of the same kind of thing. It's all H2O. So the Israelites became like a little vial of water that God tested to show that the whole of humanity would not have done any better than the Israelites and are tainted by the same sin and guilt. And then the final statement here, that through the law comes the knowledge of sin. Even though God spoke to the Israelites and gave them clarity about the law exposed their sin. It gave them the knowledge of sin in a way that was clearer than Gentiles understood sin. It's not that Gentiles knew nothing of sin, but the Israelites understood it better. They knew they were sinners even more clearly than the Gentiles. Similar to if you were to, say, pass a handicap parking law, which pretty much everybody already has, but say you passed one for the first time in your community, and the goal of the law was to provide a benefit to the people who were unfortunately handicapped and had a harder time getting into shopping for groceries and things like this. And so you paint the blue lines and you put up the handicap sign, and the goal of it is good, of course. It's meant to help the community. But if you were to see me pull into that spot, and I will get out of my car and I don't have any health problems, I can walk just fine going into the place, into the shop, and then you look and there's no handicap sign on the car or anything, then you know that hanging from the rear view mirror, you know that it's, that I've sinned, that I've done something wrong. So the law, which is otherwise good, exposes the wrong that I've done. So that's what the law did. It showed that that everyone did wrong and were guilty before God, even though they had the clarity, the knowledge of sin. All right, so that wraps up that argument, and that leaves us now at a really big turning point in the letter. It's still part of the first section of the book, because now that we've diagnosed our problem, that all people are under the wrath of God because we're guilty, we're under sin in that sense, now we need a way of escape. What is the salvation? And that's what this paragraph here is going to focus on. The next paragraph, verses 21 to 26, is what exactly does Paul say is the salvation? And maybe more importantly, what is he focused on in describing this salvation? He could have just in one verse said, Jesus saves you. But he goes on at length in detail about a few very specific things. So when he announces this salvation, what does he actually focus on as his main point of emphasis? And then the second part here, this next paragraph, verses 27 to 31, the question here is, what is he talking about in this paragraph? Because he's already made the announcement about salvation. So what is this next paragraph about, and how does it relate back to that paragraph? So that's your next challenge. Best wishes, and we'll see you next time.